Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Avatar video. This is going to be my first impressions video discussing episodes 1 and 2 of Netflix Avatar The Last Airbender, which of course is out today. All 8 episodes are available, and this is how I'm going to be going through them. So over the first 2 days you're going to see my thoughts on the first 2 episodes, a video covering the next 2 episodes, and I'll just go through it kind of 2 by 2 for some initial impressions. You'll also see up on the channel some my reactions to the first 2 episodes also, and then the other 6 will be channel member exclusive videos. But let's get into my initial impressions. So I've finally seen some episodes of Netflix Avatar. I haven't watched the other 6 yet. How did I like it? In my mind, it was very good. I have, of course, have some issues. I don't think it's perfect, but I am mostly positive on this, and I would say it is a success as a live action version of Avatar for me. I think there are things to critique about sort of how they did changes and stuff like that, but I think it mostly captures the spirit of Avatar very well. I think the acting performances are all really well done in that I think all the characters do so far feel like they're characters, and even accounting for kind of changes and how they switched scenes around. I do think it just inherently comes across as Avatar to me, and I think this so far is shaping up to very much be a success. This is the live action version of the show that I think we need, that will help to build the fandom up as we enter sort of Avatar Studios era of things. This was, I just think, really well done overall, and I just think from effectively minute 1 right up to the end, I don't have that many like major issues. Like I'll try and discuss some of them here without going like crazy in depth, because again, I've only seen the episodes once and I'm trying to discuss like nearly 2 hours of content here in one video. There's a lot going on here. We'll get to the details in the coming days and stuff like that. So where do I want to start? I suppose just in terms of adaptation, because I think this is what's always interested me the most about this, and trying to analyze it as we've gone through like the promo stuff, is just like, what are the big changes, and like what is different, and just how different is it? And while yes, there are changes along the way, it very much is still the same story. At least so far, these first 2 episodes have been, in my mind, relatively accurate to the original source material, and the changes have not been like super like, they really switch things up. The stuff with Zhao is probably the most different in terms of, I'm a bit worried about the Zhao stuff, just because I think they, in taking out, or at least we haven't got to it yet, Zuko, Zhao, Agni, Kai, I think you removed a very important early scene that's probably the thing I'm questioning the most right now, is that I was like, oh, wow, Zhao's not in the first episode, so 103 has not been adapted in the way we maybe kind of want. But then they eventually got to Zhao, and they went into, oh, so he follows Zuko then to Kyoshi Island. That's a interesting way to do it. And I just felt as Zhao's introduction, he almost didn't stand out as much as I wanted him to, because I think the performance, the actor is doing a good job of portraying Zhao. It just feels like, why did you take away his Agni Kai scene? I'm a little bit kind of taken aback by that, because I think it's such an important moment for both characters, just what that scene actually means, that I just find it to be weird that you wouldn't do it. And I wonder, like, are they saving it up for like the finale maybe, that will build over the course of the season to a Zuko versus Zhao fight in the Northern Water Tribe like happens, and they just didn't want to give you that fight earlier on? That's one to keep an eye out for. I'm definitely going to be keeping my eye out on the Zhao scenes as I go through my watch through going forward. But so the Zhao stuff, I think, is they get to a point where I think it's fine, because like at the very least at the end of the episode they tease this idea of we're subtly going to work together on this, but then of course it's immediately revealed Zhao has betrayed Zuko's trust here and has informed Ozai. So the other characters are going to be coming into play here, which I suppose brings up the idea of, like, apart from the one Zhao scene at the Ozai scene right at the end of him getting the letter and like, okay, the Avatar is back. No Azula and no Ozai in the opening 2 episodes, basically. Which I think is fine. I think it is perfectly fine to be the case, because this is one of your bigger changes, is like what way you are going to do Azula and Zhao. So interested to see how much stuff there is with them. But I think it was the right choice not to overload the first 2 episodes by including stuff with them. Which, maybe speaking of overloading, maybe with the first episode we probably need to talk about the fact that one thing I was worried about once the initial impressions came out was the idea of, effectively the first episode is almost like 4 episodes in one. It has to cover 101, 102 and 103, but then also effectively a whole episode's worth of like flashback content with the Air Nomad genocide and the lead-in to it. And I think it's an interesting one, because the first episode is a little bit packed. And unfortunately it is 103, Southern Air Temple. That is where it suffers, I think, a little bit. But I liked the new content at the start. We got like 20 minutes of flashback, which I was expecting, but it's still interesting to be watching through it, and you're like, wow, this is still going. We're still here. Like the comet hasn't arrived yet. We're not straight into the death of all these airbenders. I like the build up to it in terms of attempting to explain some of the background behind this, in terms of the opening scene with the kind of earthbender sort of scout / spy trying to get word back to the Earth King that the Fire Nation are going to attack the Earth Kingdom, and that this is actually a ploy by Sozin to distract the world into thinking the Earth Kingdom is going to be under attack, when actually they're going after the airbenders. That's an interesting one, because of course this is a vague thing in the original, the kind of source material, where we don't really have a ton of information surrounding the logistics of how the war started in terms of where everyone was. I think the RPG clarifies the idea that it was basically a strike against all of the nations at once. That's the kind of canon version of things. This is why no one was able to sort of assist any other nation, is because the powered up Fire Nation with their firebending, but also their kind of technology, was able to, you know, occupy the Earth Kingdom, occupy the Water Tribes, and attack the Air Temples at the same time. And again, like, it'll be interesting to see if the canon version of events finally maybe comes out at some point, and how this version maybe, you know, anyway relates to that, because this is the interesting kind of canonical discussion of, like, this is entirely kind of new in a way. Does this, like, apply in any way to the main continuity? My guess would be that this is not how it's meant to have taken place in the original. Obviously, for one, the situation surrounding Aang plays out differently. There's a clear difference in how it plays out. And I do think just we do know enough details to suggest that it wasn't necessarily this situation where there was these maybe ploys going on, and it was more that the Fire Nation attacked everywhere all at once. But I like that we did get to see the Earth Kingdom, really skilled Earth Kingdom soldier at the start. I thought that fight sequence was actually really cool and intense in the capital. And just that idea of, like, he sacrifices himself, he gets the report out, but it's then revealed to be false. And it's like, it was all for nothing. Sozin has been quite clever here. And they do get across the brutality of the Fire Nation here, in terms of this guy gets incinerated, and then we do, as we go into the Air Nomad genocide, see more of that as we go forward. I would have a disappointment around Gyatso. I wish we got to see him in action a little bit more. I understand it in the sense that they wanted to get the power of the comet across. And so the line of, basically, on any other night you probably would have, like, bested me, but not tonight with the comet. I get that. That is an important line to have there to get across that, hey, you're a better bender than me overall. I probably couldn't beat you any other time. I like that, but I also wish like we would have seen more from Gyatso. Just because like he is kind of like defending the kids, and obviously the idea is that his defense has to fail because it is everyone else is wiped out. He has to fall at some point. I just wish that, kind of like some of the other airbenders that we got to see, he got a little bit more of a showcase than just the mostly hand to hand stuff at the start that we got with him with the staff. Just because I think everyone had that anticipation even from like the original, because there's like the implication of where where Gyatso is found in the original, like what did he do to these firebenders here? And they maybe didn't give him the most incredible showing here, but I don't have a massive problem with it overall. So that was kind of all, fine. I perhaps would say that like it maybe didn't need to be as long as it did the opening sequence, in terms of like I think they could have actually in this amount of time presented more context for what's going on here. In that, like, I'm almost surprised that we didn't maybe delve into some of the like Avatar and the Fire Lord kind of backstory. Like if you're giving maybe some of the context behind the war here, is anything else going to come out about this? Which maybe brings up the idea of like, I think there's going to be massive questions, at least I have some questions here, about what exactly is Roku going to tell Aang over the course of this season, because it felt like they gave Kyoshi so much of what Roku tells Aang in the original, and I kind of feel like with some of the changes I think that we know are in place, what does Roku have to tell Aang, and what's going on there? I'm fascinated to see how they make Roku feel important and as the previous Avatar to Aang. And I do feel that his backstory with Sozin is kind of one of the things that you have to get across here, to give extra context to everything. But yeah, so some of the action I thought was pretty good. The tornado that then Sozin set on fire, that was a very kind of brutal scene. And they just got across the idea that like if you get hit with a comet enhanced blast, you are going down and probably not getting up. So I thought that was pretty well done. So yeah, for now, I think that's my main thoughts on that opening scene. I would say probably the main maybe interesting point is that I'm kind of surprised that they maybe don't have more to say about the opening sequence, given that it's effectively 20 minutes of new content. I maybe wanted potentially like a little bit more information, but anyway. Getting into the actual sort of main content, just attempting to go through this maybe a little bit in order. The early stuff of like, okay, like Katara and Sokka finding Aang was pretty nicely done. Again, you could see the slight change from taking away some of Sokka's little kind of maybe more sexist comments to more just the idea of leaning more into Sokka. You are making maybe too much out of the responsibility that dad left you, and I have things to do as well, and like you are not right just because you have this responsibility, and that being more of the kind of dynamic they're going for there. And I thought that was like relatively fine. I suppose we'll get to talking about maybe Sokka in the second episode, and maybe how the changes are a little bit more maybe slightly awkward there. But I think it was mostly fine here. I do feel that there across the board was perhaps a clear intent to not have the characters have maybe really clear-cut flaws, which I thought was kind of interesting, in that they didn't really have Katara's like maybe big emotional outbursts where you're kind of thinking in your head, that might get you in trouble if you go off like that too often, and like you need to control that a little bit more. Sokka's sexism, kind of being too much of a kind of being too confident in his kind of meager abilities, they definitely played that down a bit. And then probably most notably with Aang, his flaw of, you know, the not wanting the responsibility, the reluctant avatar, I thought they really undercut, I think, sort of the intent of the arc, because you push multiple times across these two episodes the idea that Aang is struggling to accept his responsibilities as the Avatar. But then in the backstory, you have him just go off to sort of clear his head rather than actually run away. And it's just a bit of a coincidence. It's basically just bad timing that he happens to be away from everyone as it happens. And look, it still roughly gets the arc across, but it felt like a change that you didn't need to do, and it felt like it's one that you only really made potentially because you were worried that people would be very negative towards Aang if he did do as he does in the original and leave the letter. It's a proper intent to run away and potentially not come back, and that Aang has abandoned his kind of responsibilities here, and it's something that he consistently has to make up for over the course of the episode. And I just felt like some of the moments later on, like I think Sokka gets quite aggressive towards Aang and makes a comment about "you weren't here." Kyoshi even gets quite angry at Aang, and I feel it's a little undercut by the fact that Aang, it was just a bad timing more than anything, and him clearing his head wasn't really him running away, because he was even planning to like turn around and stuff like that. And it's for some people that might not matter as much, but I think for me that was one of those ones where I'm like, ooh, that wasn't the right choice, I felt. But we'll see if they maybe addressed it in more detail, and they can maybe come back to make that feel a little bit more important, because, you know, I'm only 2 episodes in, but that was my initial impression in terms of like really obvious kind of changes. It's that, yeah, not having Aang actually kind of run away, I thought was a bit weird. And then just I'm a little bit worried about some of the Zhao stuff. They're probably the main 2 changes that, from what I've seen so far, that are a little bit like, not sure how I feel about that. Otherwise, like a lot of like 101 and 102, I think, go by pretty accurately, and I would say overall I'm pretty impressed with everyone's performances overall. I think, like a lot of the initial impressions, I would say that, like, yeah, Ian as Sokka is, I think, very good. Dallas as Zuko, I think, is good, but I'm not sure if we've had enough, I think, really impactful Zuko moments just yet to maybe see if I've seen the full range there. This is where I would have liked to have potentially seen the Zuko Zhao Agni Kai, because I do think, like, the Iroh scene with Zuko and Zhao after the fight of just like, my nephew is more honorable in banishment than kind of you are in accepting your defeat. That would have been a big scene that I would have liked to have seen him get a chance to do, but it gets perfectly fine. Gordon as Aang, very good. Overall, I think so far, I think they're actually like pretty stand out to me. Like I'm thinking in my head going through this, and I'm kind of like, do you know what? Actually, like, I think he might actually be my kind of top performer here. I'm a big Aang fan, so I think the fact that I'm so positive about that performance is pretty good. Katara's actress, Gyo Teo, again, I'm not sure if like she's had maybe as many big emotional scenes as maybe we need, and this is where I'm interested to see her maybe get a bit more direct focus in episodes. But I think it's been good so far. It's definitely been good, and it's maybe just that we maybe haven't seen the more intense kind of emotion scenes from Katara, where we really see the drive of the character maybe come out. So maybe when it comes to some of the Jet stuff that we're going to see down the line, and especially I suppose her arc up in the north with Pakku, we'll get to see her shine a little bit more. But a lot of the line delivery, just in terms of like about like her hope, what she kind of sees in Aang, I thought was pretty nicely done. Gran had a bit more dialogue than usual. yes, some of it was maybe exposition, but I thought it was fine. I thought it made sense as like the basically the elder of the tribe, revealing the history to Aang. Everyone else knows it, but he doesn't. And I thought they actually did the kind of "you're the last Airbender" reveal quite nicely. And then when she comes in later and is like, "You're more than that. You're the Avatar," I think that all worked. You had other stuff that's like smaller, like say no penguin sledding. I understand why they didn't do penguin sledding. I'm assuming this is where that would have been a crazy budget style thing to do, and probably a crazy scene to even attempt to shoot in any sort of a way, because it's a giant action scene that involves like animals, that actually involves having like a crazy environment as well, that you can do in animation. But that would have probably been one of those ones where like it would have blown the budget for maybe not the most important scenes of the episode. But I also like, did we even see an otter penguin? I know Katara referenced them before, and I'm just interested to see some stuff like that, like just sort of in a way ancillary animals just like around the place. Are we seeing that too often? I think we got that a little bit in the initial scenes, like where we saw an ostrich horse. We've seen Appa, we've seen Momo. There were some animals, I think, in the opening sequence. Again, I'd have to go back and watch it, but that's what's going to be interesting as we go forward. We know we're getting the Shearshu, like, but are we getting Flopsy? We didn't get the Unagi or giant koi fish. Again, maybe I need to watch like the background as we come in. Maybe they subtly showed something in the background, but they definitely removed that focus from the Kyoshi episode. And again, for budget, for CGI based reasons, I understand that that's always going to be a challenge with this show of, do we randomly devote a lot of attention to a quick scene just to show off an animal, or a quick scene just to show off this like oddly like detailed and complex thing that we're only going to be at for a second? So the prioritization, I guess, of CG is a factor in this show in terms of what they maybe are going to focus on versus what they're not going to focus on. And I think that just needs to be noted to a certain degree. As we go forward, Iroh, we didn't get too much Iroh overall, but I'm liking the performance so far. I liked the extra scene that they added with Aang talking to Iroh. I like that Iroh came in. That was where you maybe saw the idea of like early Iroh in the original, basically just the first 2 episodes, is like a little bit off. You can tell they haven't fully planned out his character yet. They sorted out basically in my mind by episode 3. But here, I actually like this scene because Aang was able to kind of in a way see through maybe what Iroh was getting at and be like, okay, you say that that's why the Fire Nation are doing this, but what do you think? And it's like, you can tell, I think, from Iroh's reaction that it's like, this is how I used to think. That, like, yeah, the idea that, like, the reason I did the Caesar Bossing Say and wanted to end the war so desperately was because I felt that, well, one way to end the war is for the side that's winning to win quicker. That's my logic. But now you clearly get the idea that there is something more there, and he's in this interesting position where, like, I'm helping Zuko, I'm trying to guide him down the right path, but this is the path he's on, and I was in a position of like, what do I do here, kind of, and I did like that overall. They had Gran be the one to give Katara the waterbending scroll, which I thought was a nice, reasonable way to do it, that there's some surviving relic in the tribe about waterbending that Gran has kept from her until her destiny has kind of come into play. They didn't do the Avatar state scene with regards to like Zuko and Aang falling off the boat, which I thought was fine. I think that's one of those ones where it's one of the kind of maybe weaker applications of the Avatar state, and I understand from their perspective, like, their own episode 2 with the Kyoshi Avatar state scene was meant to be their bigger kind of action Avatar state scene, though we still got the Southern Air Temple scene overall as well. So I suppose that brings us maybe into how they did Southern Air Temple. They did the thing I maybe didn't quite expect them to do, and that is kind of just in a way cut almost immediately from Southern Water Tribe to the Southern Air Temple, and we just like, oh yeah, we have to do this as well. they got to Momo like eventually. Actually, maybe I'm mixing the episodes together. Did they do Momo only at the start of the next episode? I know. I think they included a little bit of him. Anyway, I understand this. Like, they felt that they couldn't ignore it because they had to have the Aang finding Gyatso's body moment to get the Avatar state scene, to put his friends at risk, to highlight why he feels some need to control it early on. Makes sense. But I personally really like 103. I think it's a very important episode. Like, I would always recommend to someone, if you're watching a group of episodes, to start the original series. Don't just watch the first two because it's a two-parter. Watch the first three, because 3 is where a lot of the nuance comes into play, with the Zuko Zhao dynamic being quite important, and what they do on the Aang side of the episode at the Southern Air Temple. Like, I think it's a really, really important one. So, like I said, like, a little bit of issues just like that. I did feel 103 was a little bit, like, you could tell it was a bit pulled apart to fit into the adaptation, and I think it could have used just a little bit more time. Did we need to do the full plot of Katara and Sokka, keep the information away from Aang and as we, like, explore? But I think especially more on the Zuko side of things, I think it could have done with maybe some of that Zhao stuff overall. Another change, they didn't have Katara and Sokka be the ones to sort of talk Aang down out of the Avatar state. Instead, they just went into Aang remembering what Gyatso said, and that stops it. Which, I from a certain point of view, I kind of get the idea there of, like, this has been triggered by the death of Gyatso, so in a way, him remembering the words of that same person should be helpful. But I don't like that there really wasn't any involvement from Katara and Sokka, because I get maybe why they changed it was that they felt, well, like, Sokka and Katara have only just met Aang. Does it make sense that they're already willing to consider him a member of their family? That sort of idea with the way the line works in the original. To me, if you were trying to go for, I think, the right way maybe to do this, it would have been maybe some sort of a blend where he's thinking about Gyatso and you get that line, but then you still have, as Katara and Sokka kind of say their lines, and it is a mix of the two that is what calms him down, kind of highlighting that, like, they're not that close just yet, but that they know that their destinies are kind of intertwined here, and that for Aang, the main takeaway from this is that you may have lost, like, your people, but you haven't lost everyone possibly that's close to you in the world. There are new people to form those close relationships with. And it's just, like, the subtleties of some of these points in terms of, like, analyzing the changes and the idea that, like, are they nitpicks or are they valid criticisms of, like, what maybe could have improved the episodes? And for me, like I said, overall, I've enjoyed what I've seen. So I suppose moving away from the first episode, Warriors. I really liked it. I liked how they did the expansion, and what I think was so interesting about it was that they obviously did a weird mix of kind of elements of 103, in that, like, this was the Zhao introduction episode where Zuko and Iroh meet Zhao, but then it was also, like, extended Kyoshi Island stuff as well. So that was sort of interesting. I was kind of surprised, actually, given that, like, it's like a 48-minute episode. I was kind of surprised that, like, it's almost surprisingly limited in scope, in a way, in that, like, say what Aang and Katara get up to, it almost feels like the original episode maybe had more things kind of happen in a way. And maybe that's just because, like, Aang is kind of meditating with Kyoshi as we cut to a lot of other scenes happening here. They obviously exchanged the plot of, like, Aang with riding the animals, which kind of takes him out for a little bit, with Katara guarding him and, like, saving his life, to Katara effectively guards him as he makes this kind of spiritual connection. And this is part of what informs, like, are you ready to take on the Avatar state in this moment? Yes. Which I suppose the Kyoshi stuff, the way they had tackled presenting new information on it was interesting in that they obviously let them read the books, and it featured some of like Kyoshi's backstory. And so Katara pointed out that like, hey, did you know that she used to be like basically like a servant girl in this mansion, and that she came from like something very different from what you kind of typically see her as, which is the main takeaway a lot of people have when they first encounter the rise of Kyoshi information. So I like those little references that just give you like an extra little bit of detail. You saw a painting or a mural on the wall depicting, I'm guessing, Kyoshi versus Chin, though they didn't directly talk about that. This is where, like, trying to react to this and watch it just for the first time, like, I don't think they necessarily mentioned that, like, she created the island. Maybe it's implied by the painting, but I don't think they directly brought that up. Kyoshi and Aang do actually have a somewhat lengthy conversation. I was kind of surprised that it actually didn't delve actually more into any of the information, that like the Chin stuff didn't really come up. She talks about like her experience as the Avatar because it's Aang's first time having a past life communication. But it was interesting that like she just kind of explained a lot of the Avatar state stuff to him. She challenged Aang over the whole idea of like responsibility as well. And the one slight maybe worry with this, I just wonder, is like, what are they saving for Roku? And I have to assume that maybe some of the Avatar and the Fire Lord backstory probably has to be the significance there. If they're using extra information that we have about things, it either probably has to be that, or potentially Roku talks to Aang about like Ainu Gyatso also. That could be an interesting one depending on where Aang emotionally is at by the time we get to that episode. But yeah, they character wise, they got across that idea of like what Kyoshi ultimately kind of becomes. Maybe did they lean maybe slightly a little bit too much into kind of angry kill everyone Kyoshi? A small bit, I think, perhaps towards the end. But I also think like you still had to get across the idea is that full power Kyoshi is a force of nature basically, and I felt that when they finally did the Avatar state sequence, that it was good enough that I think it got that effect across, and it was a very powerful, I think, first like offensive kind of application of the Avatar state in terms of like she was bending like all the elements. Was there water actually? Because they weren't really near water. I'd have to watch it again. No, there was water, wasn't there? It was because she was using water tendrils to grab them and kind of pull them in, and then the other elements kind of came into play. But it was really cool. Like she brings in all the Fire Nation soldiers into a big fire explosion and sends them flying. And it's I thought it was a powerful enough display that like, oh yes, I understand why Zhao immediately ordered a retreat, because it's like, how could you ever combat that? Getting across, you know, maybe the cowardly nature of Zhao, that he fled, of course. But definitely a nice initial scene showing this off. Aang, I think, later then explains that, like, oh yeah, I can only do this stuff when I'm near shrines of past avatars. So that seems to be the kind of newer rule that they've kind of added in here, which is relatively similar to the original, where they more just expand it to be like, it doesn't have to be a specific shrine, but it can just be like, you know, significant like artifacts, or or a significant location, or just a avatar specific location can allow you to channel something that relates to a past avatar. This just makes it maybe a little bit more kind of hyper specific, that maybe each avatar has like one location that is specifically considered to be a shrine of that past avatar. But otherwise it's a perfectly I think fine way to do it overall. Because they showed that like the avatar state can still activate defensively, like Kyoshi even says that it can save your life. So we can still get some of those moments, but I'm guessing they probably are just maybe going to try and take take away some of those moments a little bit overall. But yeah, the rest of it, Katara's, I suppose, role within the episode, like you see the bravery of her standing up to Zuko, but obviously she's not skilled enough to fight against him. Whereas maybe I think her role in the original was a little bit stronger, just because she like gets to save Aang's life, and you have at least that little bit of an arc where like everything gets to Aang's head a little bit, and he's showing off too much, and you get a little bit of the jealousy arc, but then they kind of come back together. You miss some of that, I think, just in terms of like, oh yeah, you kind of realize that yeah, Katara was lower kind of importance maybe within this episode. But we'll see her maybe get some focus elsewhere as we go forward. Sokka Suki, I suppose we need to get to it here. I liked how they did it. I think the chemistry that they had was pretty good. I think, especially like as you kind of built the kind of romance, I think you could definitely feel that kind of spark between the two, and I think it was well done. Obviously, the arc is slightly changed, and I think it feels maybe a little bit awkward initially, because I think because everyone has had the experience of like, even if you care or don't care, there was the point that it was talked about a lot. Sokka's sexism arc. Is it gone? Is it toned down? What's actually happening with it? And you can see here that like it's toned down. Like I would basically say it's gone, more or less, just because I think most of nothing I felt like in terms of how Sokka approached dealing with Suki and the Kyoshi warriors, to me, ever got across the idea that he was showing them like disrespect because they were female warriors, which was obviously what the situation was in the original. That is not here. Instead, what they play up, maybe the slight need for him to be humbled, was just that he makes more out of how skilled of a warrior he is, and this comes across as maybe a little bit offensive to Suki, who has devoted herself to being a Kyoshi warrior, and that's a very important part of her life, whereas Sokka's maybe jokey, lying about like, I'm the protector of the Southern Water Tribe and I'm super skilled, but I'm not as skilled as I need to be. But then they contrast that, of course, with sort of like the bravery of him coming out on this mission to protect Aang, to try and save the world, and things being so different and changed for him, and him having a potential as a warrior, and that kind of inspiring Suki, who obviously wants to kind of go beyond the quite isolationist Kyoshi Island. And Suki's arc, I thought, was pretty well done. Obviously, it is different than kind of canon Suki, especially when you like factor in Suki alone a bit. That it is a different kind of approach to the character, at least a little bit, especially because, of course, like Yukari, her mother is there, and that character doesn't exist in the original, and she's effectively presenting some of maybe the Oyaji role, and just some of the extra details we have about Kyoshi Island. But otherwise, like, I think it works fine as just, this is this important connection that Suki makes to Sokka and Sokka makes to Suki, that it is important on both sides. I thought they got across pretty well the idea of like Suki's mother kind of seeing the idea of her making these connections and it being this really important thing, to where when Suki pops up and has left the island to participate in the war, you completely get kind of where that's going to come from. Of course, because she's been so affected by the arrival here. Otherwise, like the training stuff that they do is pretty much the same. It's just slightly, of course, differently done, because there isn't the sort of I have insulted you dynamic between the two of them going on. And I would just say that it is like, I think there's a way to do this where you just made it a bit more accurate, while maybe toning it down. Whereas I do feel that this is basically a removal here, because it's obviously, this arc doesn't really go anywhere after this point. It's done in the original as of this episode, and in my mind, I didn't really view any of it as being there. And it's just one of those ones where, like, for some people it's going to be very noticeable. For some people it's not going to be noticeable. I think what's present is fine. But again, it comes back to the idea of, why did you make this decision to change this? And I think that's an important question to ask about a lot of these changes, is that, like, why did you do that? And it feels like we didn't want people to hate the character for saying something sexist. That it feels like that is the logic. And fine, if that is the case, fine, cool. I understand it. But it also feels like I said earlier, there's a bit of a sense of, they've kind of done that a little bit with all the characters, where they're maybe a little bit afraid of showing the characters as being flawed, and that the writing in Avatar can work to get the characters past those flaws and highlight that this is just a nuance that all the characters have. You know, that sort of idea. I suppose with maybe Katara and Aang, I did like the little arc of just like Aang connecting with people, connecting with the village, connecting with Yukari and Suki, that his kind of speech to allow them to stay in the village for 2 days, that was really nice. And that Katara later notes to Sokka that, like, hey, that was pretty impressive what he was able to do, kind of highlighting that here's this side of the Avatar that he's actually going to be really good at, making connections with people. It's the other stuff that is going to have to come to him in terms of the rest of the training and all this sort of stuff. So I thought that was pretty good, the way that all worked. They had a tiny bit of the showing off arc, but in this case it was more like him actually just having fun. So they basically did him messing with the people in the Southern Water Tribe, just the same thing kind of in Kyoshi Island, which was fine, I think, overall. And I think that's basically everything I want to talk about. Again, I'm maybe, if I had the lines of dialogue up, I'd be able to maybe go a little bit more in depth, potentially on like what Kyoshi said to Aang specifically. But yeah, other than that, like, there was that one point where she got quite aggressive with him and kind of like called him out. It was just interesting to see how they actually tackled it. But overall, successful start. Obviously, as an adaptation, naturally, a lot of my review my discussion stuff is going to, in the end, lean towards how the changes were and stuff like that. But I want to make it really clear, like, my overall thoughts are that this is a success for live action Avatar so far. That I struggle to think of those episodes that I just watched and accept the idea that this is going to be considered maybe a bad attempt at Avatar. Is it perfect? No. But it's of a level of quality that is, to me, more than acceptable enough to fulfill the role that I think it needs to fulfill in the franchise. It's just another gateway into the franchise, and in that sense, I think it's been pretty successful. So just going to wrap it up there. In the comments, let me know what your thoughts were on the first 2 episodes of Netflix Avatar. What were your thoughts going through these episodes for the first time? Some of the stuff I discussed here, but yeah, you'll see a review for episode 3 and 4 together at some point later on when I watch them. But yes, that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.